Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brent Nickel. I'm an ag conservation practitioner here at the Nature Conservancy, and I'm just going to give Barry Fisher, our speaker for today, just a little bit of an introduction, and I'll hand it right off to him. So Barry recently retired from his career at the USDA, where he most recently worked in the soil health division. In that capacity, he met and spoke with farmers about soil health throughout the central part of the U.S. And since retirement, Barry manages his family farm in Greencastle, Indiana, and has a consulting business where he does training and soil health education for organizations through his company, Fisher Soil Health LLC. So with that being said, Barry, I'll just hand it over to you, and you're more than welcome to get started whenever.
All right, thanks a bunch. Good to be with everybody today. We're going to talk about, building a soil health system, and this one's mostly how do we integrate cover crops successfully into that system. And so we'll spend most of our time on kind of cover crop strategies and those kind of one-on-one, 101 type things that helps us avoid any major pitfalls along the way and starts us down the path for success. So, I'm already freezing up. Hmm.
Are you
All
trying to move
righty.
forward?
Yeah, it's already froze up on me, but I'm just going to shut my video off. I think that
Yep.
usually
And then
helps.
if there it goes.
Is it going?
Yep, it looks good on our end. We can see your slide. It says why soil health.
Okay. So I just talk about, uh, I start off by, when we talk about soil health, we really do have to understand why we're even doing some of these practices. Why would we even want cover crops? And it's all part of a soil health management system where we're managing for the living ecosystem to achieve higher soil function. And a lot of these functions that I mentioned over here to the right, those are really our ultimate goals and the ultimate rewards of integrating these practices and in integrating the soil health system. We also say that cover crops is such an integral part of the soil health management principles, and different people will have different numbers of these principles. I hold it to four because I'm a simple-minded individual, but I have four management principles that we talk about: provide continuous living roots, which of course cover crops really help us. But we usually have these in conjunction with some kind of minimizing disturbance, physical, chemical, and biological disturbance. And that's why you talk about a lot of no-till and integrated pest management and doing a better job of adapting our nutrient management, those kinds of things. But we also need maximized cover and then maximized diversity. All of these things really tie into that's why cover crops become such a play in a soil health management system. I always uh, make sure everybody remembers, though, that when we add cover crops, it's very hard to think that you're just going to add cover crops and you can just do one thing. Those cover crops are going to be a part of this total system, and they can have an effect, and they need to be collaborating with all the other practices in this system. So, so if you're going to have cover crops, they need to be in a system that now, if I'm, say, for example, no-tilling into that, I'll go to this slide here. That quality no-till system, if I'm no-tilling into those cover crops, I may have to change how my no-till planter is set up and some things like that. I will probably have to adapt my nutrient management because that cover crop is going to change the biological delivery of nutrients. So you may have to change your timing, your placement, and form and those things. You have to manage and prescribe that cover crop so it complements the next crop in your crop rotation. And then, of course, you're going to have to adapt, utilize to the best of your ability any of the new technologies that help you manage that cover crop for optimum outcomes. And also, we have to really think about, and this one gets forgotten a lot as we integrate cover crops or move to a soil health management system, is You're building a biologically active system where you depend on beneficial organisms. So you also need to have a true integrated pest management strategy. And these are all things that we can take, a whole session or a whole day even on our advanced soil health training. We'll have a whole day on each one of these kind of practices and how to optimize them in a system. So today, though, we're going to focus mostly on cover crops. But as I focus on cover crops, I'm just going to remind you real quick how you need to be thinking about how it collaborates, how the cover crops need to work together with your other practices. And just as a brief reminder, I'm going to talk about no-till for just a minute here. If you're planting now into cover crops, then your no-till and planter setup is going to be critical. So you need to think very seriously how that planter is set up. What can you do differently to make sure that it still accomplishes the key tasks of getting every seed exactly the same depth, every seed exactly the same spacing, and every seed in exactly the same environment. And so it's no different than any other planting system, especially if you're planting corn. You need to get these things done to optimize yield. And then beyond that, since now it's in a cover crop biomass and you've changed the biology, you have to further do some management so that every seedling has access to the same resources. If you don't accomplish that, it's no different than any other system. Every time emergence is delayed, emergence is uneven, you're giving up yield. Okay, so we've known this for a long time in the no-till circles, but I remind everybody that now we're planting into cover crop biomass. So just remember that we still have to accomplish those goals if we're going to optimize yield and performance and get the most outcome. The other thing I remind everybody is back to this, every seedling has to have access to the same resources. And I'm talking about your cash crop at this point in time, but think about the same thing as you try to establish your cover crop. How you harvest and the operations involved with harvest will affect your cover crop establishment. So you still have to manage the weight and the traffic, and you still want to do a really good job of spreading the crop residues. If your crop residues look more like the spread pattern that you see on the left, then it's more likely that your cover crop is also going to have an uneven emergence and stand. And think about that. You're setting yourself up for what you're going to plant into that cover crop next spring. So if we follow those rules that we just talked about, how can you expect to plant your cash crop and have even emergence and access to the same resources, the same moisture, the same temperature, if your cover crop looks like this as it emerges out of that unevenly spread residues? So I just have to remind everybody that treat this cover crop like it's a crop, and then you're going to have a better situation to plant your actual cash crop into. And I think so many times I see these really uneven cover crop stands that folks are, they're trying to save some money. I get that, but your ultimate goal is to have a positive outcome, and it starts with getting a good even stand of that cover crop, just like you would an even stand of your cash crop. So these are just some reminders. The other reminder I try to tell everybody is, now you're planting this cover crop, it's got its own effect on the biology in the soil. And so I show this plot line a lot because all of our hybrids and all of our nutrient management strategies have been developed a lot of times out of a full width tillage system, like you see on this graph. Under a full width tillage system, or more of a conventional type tillage system, we can measure microbial activity, and what we're truly measuring is CO2 leaving the soil. And we see this every year in a full width tillage system. as we see this huge spike in microbial activity that's ultimately coming from, we're measuring CO2, but that comes from that last tillage pass. And every time we do a tillage pass, we're getting a big flush of CO2 leaving the soil. That's your carbon leaving the soil. So it is an expense of your carbon. But as all those microbes process all that from that tillage and all that new food from the organic matter, and then they finally eat themselves out of house and home, and you'll see the population and the activity crash. But that crash means it's probably leaving behind a big flush of plant available nutrients. That's that biological delivery of nutrients that we have to remember happens from tillage. Tillage is a nutrient application for your crop. Okay, and all of our hybrids have been pulled from that and selected over generations from that type system. Well, now we're probably going to switch to something more like a no-till system, and you can see how the microbial response changes tremendously, and that microbial response changes its delivery of nutrients in the spring of the year, and this is a significant change when we've got hybrids that were selected from the other system. So we've learned over the years, and this is just switching from full width tillage to no-till. This is probably even more pronounced when we add cover crops that we're planting into. And I'm speaking mostly about corn management at this point in time because nitrogen is so important. And so this is a big flush of nutrients, and especially a big flush of nitrogen that's now changed. So you need to adapt your nutrient management. So it becomes even more important that we think about either having a significant amount of our nitrogen placed closer to planting on the planter as starter, or an early precision side dress application if you have that capability. But this is where starter nitrogen and then adding a little sulfur in that, you're compensating for what was otherwise going to be delivered through that tillage operation that no longer exists. This doesn't have to hurt us, though, if we understand that and we change our management for that. Okay, so those are just reminders how the other practices in your system have to be possibly adapted and managed to complement the addition of these cover crops. So now we'll dive more into the cover crops. And of course, the reason we're looking at cover crops, beyond what I mentioned in the planning principles, is it gives us an opportunity to capture more sunlight, more of the year, capture more of that CO2, and convert that to organic matter in our soil. That's one of the number one, at the end of the day, that's our number one benefit of adding these cover crops, and why it helps us build soil health so much. It also helps us lose less carbon to the atmosphere, which doesn't do anybody any good. When we use that process to capture and use photosynthesize, capture sunlight, use photosynthesis, use that CO2 to convert to organic matter, and then we also combine that, especially with a no-till type system, and we leave these channels of roots that you see in these photos, we leave them undisturbed, we can build deep reservoirs of organic matter, and we build deep reservoirs of water availability, of nutrient availability. So this system is mimicking the prairie type system, how that built some really good soils over time, many centuries ago. But if we see these kinds of things, we're actually creating a path of least resistance for the next crop's roots to access water, nutrients, that soil organic matter, all those microbial activities and processes that are delivering resources to that crop. And it really helps build resilience during droughts and other things. If we can get roots down to a path of least resistance to this reservoir of water and nutrients, we can go a long way toward taking drought out of the equation on crop production. So this is why we're doing this. This is part of that building that soil function that has so much to do with managing water and managing nutrients. We also have to realize that our cover crop has to complement the next crop in the crop rotation. Okay, so when we think strategically about selecting our cover crops and managing our cover crops, we have to know what the next crop in the crop rotation is. And so here's a picture of corn that the one on the left is planted into a pretty tall, pretty aggressive cereal rye type cover crop that is somewhat competing for the same resources that the corn would really need early in the season. The one on the right shows two different variations, cover crops. This is a winter kill cover crop on the far right in the right photo. And then the one on the left, even though you see a lot of residue, one thing that we did in this particular situation is there's a lot of brassicas, Austrian winter peas, and vetch and crimson clover in this mix. So while you see some cereal rye residues there, it's only part of a mix that was pretty high in protein, which was pretty complementary to the next crop in the crop rotation. So either of these strategies are better than just a pure stand on the left. And this is even worse. This is more pronounced, I guess, this tie up of nutrients early in a transition to a soil health management system. The longer you're in this system, the more the nutrients cycle on their own, and this becomes less of an issue that you have to worry so much about. But early on, especially, we want to really pay close attention to the carbon to nitrogen ratio, because it's that carbon to nitrogen ratio that either speeds the mineralization and delivery of nutrients from the biology in the soil, or it slows and immobilizes the release of nitrogen by those microbes. So we look at the carbon to nitrogen of the residue that we're creating with this cover crop. And so even if we look at like rye cover crop here in this photo, between a vegetative stage and then closer to anthesis, we see that carbon starts building rapidly in that cover crop biomass. As it gets very far away from this kind of ideal balance of carbon to nitrogen, then it gets harder and harder to get that nitrogen mineralized in time for the corn crop to use it. So we still say these make really good cover crop strategies, and this residue is very complementary for soybeans because soybeans can make their own nitrogen. But we want to hold that carbon to nitrogen down ahead of corn, especially if we're early in this system. Okay. And here's just a graph that depicts what I just talked about. But notice these high carbon to nitrogen residues. If they're high, we see the soluble nitrogen, or the plant available nitrogen level in the soil. It diminishes, it's kind of depressed for a longer period of time, higher those residues are in carbon. Conversely, if they're lower carbon to nitrogen residues, more like legumes or a vegetative grass, for instance, then notice the soluble level of N only drops off momentarily before it goes up and even winds up much higher and much higher for longer. And so the availability of those nutrients is there even longer in this scenario. So that's what we want ahead of corn. Okay. So strategically be thinking for corn. Think like these cover crops. Be strategizing like you were going to feed livestock or feed a cow. You want something that's high protein, something that's got a high digestibility. And so I think of high protein. So you're thinking of things, if you could get them there, the clover and peas, or maybe a winter kill scenario. If you've got another chance, if you can keep those cover crops vegetative or terminate them in a vegetative state, they're going to release those nutrients back ahead in a corn scenario pretty quickly. Okay, so there's all kinds of strategies from a selection standpoint, and when you terminate, you can hold that, keep that more ideal for the corn crop. There's other technologies and innovations, though, that farmers are coming up with, where we just skip a row, and it's kind of a biological strip till, if you will, where you're going to plant your corn in between, but give it more space. Give that corn plant more space so it's not competing for that immobilized nitrogen by that cereal rye cover crop. And this innovation alone has shown to provide a lot of uh, uh, increase in production, and really helps that corn get off to a better start. And as we look down the road, there's other innovations that a lot of farmers can find. We're even strategically placing more legume next to the row. You're going to plant your corn in this row, keep your grasses further to the middle. We can still get a nice diverse cover crop in a lot of cases in this scenario, but and this really has shown in some of the plots like John Pike has down in Southern Illinois. These plots really performed well compared to just a straight broadcast rate and full seeding rate of these same cover crop mixes. So as we move down the line, we may have more sessions on more intentional management, but for 101, we'll probably stay focused on just what are your overall strategies here. So soybeans is a little different. Soybeans uh, make their own nitrogen, like we said. So immobilizing nitrogen is not as big a concern for us. If we plant those, having a really thick mulch seems to benefit cover crops. Seems to benefit soybeans a lot, and there's a lot of reasons behind that, but probably late season water, better weed control. We get a nutrient cycling late in the growth cycle that helps us with pod fill. So beans do really well in this high biomass and high carbon to nitrogen ratio type residues like cereal rye. So that's why you hear time and time again, make one of your first moves in this direction. Plant cereal rye after corn, and then no-till beans into cereal rye, because that works pretty well. So if I take these strategies to here's just an example in a corn bean rotation. Here's an example of a nice step in process that has low risk that should work for most producers. And so what I would start is my first move would be drill or aerial seed rye or triticale in corn stalks. That's my first no-till operation. I use cereal rye because it's very flexible. Both of these species are very flexible. I can plant them late in the season. I'm probably going to get a successful establishment of my cover crop with these. They're very hardy. They do well, and I want if I'm new to this system, then I want to have an early success point. Okay, I want to have a success right out of the gate. So this would be my step one. After corn, I would drill, no-till drill or aerial seed some cereal rye or triticale into corn stalks. My next no-till operation would be no-till into that rye residue. And since I'm new to it, I'm probably going to try to terminate that rye relatively early, maybe 2 weeks before I plan to plant my soybeans. However, we've seen time and time again producers that are using this system a lot. If we don't get that cover crop terminated, that cereal rye cover crop, it's not the end of the world. We still can plant soybeans into this green biomass just fine. It's just most people, if they're brand new to this, that's probably not where I start them in a planting green scenario. It works successfully, and if this happens to you, where you just can't get it terminated, talk to some folks that have been doing this for a while, and they'll talk you through this. Really, it works quite well for soybeans to be planted into this scenario. Okay. I would, if I don't get it planted, then, once your cover crop how do I gauge? Should I go ahead and terminate that cover crop, or should I wait? And my rule of thumb is if it gets knee high, once that cereal rice starts getting to be knee high, then I'm going to be more likely planning to plant green into it. The reason is if I terminate at that stage and then I get rain, that's the worst case scenario. I don't want to have a big, tall cereal rye cover crop that's half dead, and then it's going to get a rain on it, and it's going to turn to wet rope. That's the hardest planting condition you can ever have in a cover crop scenario. So at some point there, you just need to make the decision probably to plant, but then get it terminated very, very quickly. Okay. So that's your strategy on that. Okay. So that would be your second no-till operation. I would plant beans, no-till beans in there. I would tend to plant those beans early, and I would probably, if I'm early to this system, I would plant an earlier maturity group bean. A lot of farmers do that anyway, just to spread out harvest, and an early planted, early maturity group bean has a lot of advantages because now I can possibly have a better window in the fall. I can get the beans off early enough that it's going to give me a better window to optimize the kind of cover crop mix that I would really like to plant ahead of corn. Okay, so that's my strategy there, is why I'm thinking about planting beans early and planting an earlier group bean. So that's my second no-till operation. Think about those principles that I mentioned in the beginning. I've already added some diversity. I'm keeping cover over the winter. I'm keeping living roots over the winter. So I'm getting some of those uh, um, strategies, some of those soil health principles under my belt early on. If the beans do come off early enough, then now I do have that window. I can do some different things more strategic ahead of my next corn crop. So my third no-till operation becomes my second mix of cover crops, and maybe I've adjusted my drill so that I can do it in strips so that I can strategically locate those cover crops. Maybe the beans came off early enough that I can do a more diverse mix. There's all kinds of strategies that I've now had time to get ready for over the summer. And if I can get one of these cover crop strategies in place and get that successfully seeded with my third no-till operation, then just think about the biological function that I've got. Think about what's going on before I've even planted my first corn crop. So my fourth no-till operation is my no-till cover crop. So just think what's happened before I've planted my no-till corn into that cover crop. Think about what's been going on in the last 18 months if I stepped in this way. I've had 3 no-till planted, so I've minimized disturbance. I've had year-round ground cover. I've maximized my ground cover. I've added diversity that was lacking. I'd never had this kind of plant diversity in my system in a corn bean rotation before. And I've had 2 winters of a living root. So I've got a soil that's really starting to function. I'm building aggregate stability. I'm getting better aeration, better infiltration. I'm really improving that soil and preparing that soil before I ever really plant my first corn crop into this system. And so if I've stepped in this very logical manner, and this isn't the only way to do it, but this is an example of using how your knowledge and understanding of how the living ecosystem can work for you if you understand it. And if you do this, then you shouldn't expect a big yield drag or major problems as we step through this process. There shouldn't be a lot of train wrecks. It gives you a lot of opportunities to plan, a whole cropping season ahead and have a really good outcome. So, if we truly want to build soil health, and we've talked about cover crops, I think the next session that's scheduled is setting up the planter, and so that'll go hand in hand with this really well. But as long as we understand, how the soil is designed to function and then manage accordingly, then we're going to have positive outcomes. And so hopefully this has been helpful, give you a little step in approach and give you an idea how we can take production and conservation further. This doesn't have to be a major yield hit, and you don't have to live through the horror stories that maybe you've heard. we now know how to manage and successfully step into this soil health management system without major train wrecks. So don't make the mistakes that others maybe have already made for you, because we have a good network around that understand how to make this system work. So that's all I had for today, guys. But I don't know if any questions came in the chat, or you have any time for anything like that or not. But I'll be happy to answer any questions if any came in while we were talking.
No, that's great. Thank you, Barry. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but we do have time. So if there are any questions, feel free to either come off mute or put something in the chat, and we'll work on getting those answered.
And if
We do have
anybody,
a question in the chat, Barry. A couple of
okay.
them. The first one from Jeff. What do you think about planting corn on a radish row in the spring regarding planter row stability? If you need any more clarification on that, Barry, I think Jeff might be able to come off mute if possible.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. You know, a lot of times radishes, if they get very big, especially, and then they die over the winter, there's kind of a hole there. The thing that I've noticed about most of the time with radish is it heaves the soil up a little bit. And so if you're running row cleaners at all, it's been my experience that the row cleaner will knock that heaved up soil from around there. It knocks it in pretty good. And I've really never seen a major um, problem there. Uh, to to counteract that problem somewhat is you can always not just add radishes, but add oats and radishes. And the oats provide that fibrous root system, and it helps some of that heaving. And then uh, uh, it lessens what you would see, that those big pit holes that you maybe you've experienced that or something. But most cases I've not seen that be a major problem. You just kind of adjust your row cleaner so that you're kind of knocking off a little bit of that heaved up soil into the hole, and it seems to be by planting time that those have filled in, and it's not a major problem.
Great, thank you. There is another question from Dan. What programs does the NC support for cover crops? Dan, are you asking about what programs does TNC support for cover crops?
Yeah, I'll bet that's probably for you guys.
Yep. I think so too. So there's a couple of them. One of them actually just got frozen. It was our Farmers for Soil Health program here in Ohio. So it just recently got frozen, but that was one that we were using to incentivize growers for cover cropping. And then we do have one other one. It's specific towards dairy producers that take at least 25% of their milk volume to the Superior plant in Eastern Ohio. We do fund a cover crop incentive for those producers that are applicable, up to $40 an acre for that. But those are the two main programs that TNC is supporting for cover crops here in Ohio. Matt, do you know of any others that are currently touched down here in this state?
I do not.
So Brent, let me give you my situation. So I am not a direct farmer. I'm a landowner,
Sure.
and I have interest in having my operators move to a more soil favorable operation. And I'm looking, obviously, cover crops is one of those methods, and I'm looking for incentives to have my operator work with me to move to cover crops. And so I'm looking for any kind of options that might be out there.
Sure. So financial incentive wise, Matt or Barry, you might be able to touch on this a little bit better than me, but there is, I suppose there is some EQIP funding out there through the NRCS. I know there might be short-staffed currently. Dan, where are you currently located? What county?
So I'm in Delaware County in Scioto Township.
Okay. A good person to talk to regarding that would probably be Scott Stevens from that Delaware County SWCD.
Yeah, and I've had a number of contacts out there and looked at the EQIP programs. Obviously, with the current I guess, political situation, that appears to be challenging, and it's a little unclear what's going to happen into the future. So, hence my interest just in what other options there might be.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I know there are some other cover crop programs that in Ohio that are like, I guess more locally funded. I know Ducks Unlimited had one out there not too long ago. I don't know if it's still around or not. I know last year it was, and I think they were funding like $25 an acre, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but Dan, if you want to send me an email, I can work on trying to find something for you. Um, I'll put it in the chat here,
Yeah,
and we can
that'd be
maybe
great. I'll reach out to you directly.
perfect, and we'll see what we can I guess hunt down for you on that end.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Looks like Dawn did have a question for Barry. Can you give strategies to move her from single cover crop species to simple mixes?
Yeah, in a corn bean rotation, I understand that man, it's hard to come up with a very diverse mix. And so one of my strategies is, of course, I still to this day use some earlier group soybeans and I plant them early. I'll plant those in April. And that usually gives us a window to at least add like something like rapeseed, maybe some crimson clover, some kind of hardy. You may only get to add a couple of other species, but we also use it by planting a little bit earlier. You can go instead of cereal rye, you can go to barley, which isn't as aggressive at immobilizing nitrogen. There's other options like that, but I almost always will get some something like dwarf Essex rape plus crimson clover in some of my acres that way, and so that's a strategy. And if we've got a whole group of farmers here in West Central Indiana, we work together, and fortunately, one of our seed dealers is also uh, heavily into cover crops and no-till, and so when they put out their plots, we've found time and time again that we can find an earlier maturity group, bean and corn sometimes, that allows us to harvest earlier. And when we harvest earlier, man, just a week or two different makes a big difference in the options for what cover crops I can put in that mix. So, and we're all in this area, we all kind of try to do that every chance we get. Some years harvest is just too late and you're just gonna have to go with what will work. And a lot of times that's cereal rye. Moving just to triticale is a tends to be a more of a forage bred species, and triticale will keep a lower carbon to nitrogen and stay vegetative longer in the spring. So there's other strategies like that. It's not totally different species, but it is a even a better quality single species than maybe what you've had it before. So I don't know if that answered all of the question. In a corn bean rotation, it's always going to be a challenge, but anything you can do to harvest earlier or establish earlier to get those diverse mixes out there, then that's an advantage.
Great. We do have another question for you, Barry. What seeding rate would you recommend if I use a splitter planter to plant a row of radish next to a row of oats?
Yeah, that's the beauty. If you're using a planter, it can be very accurate, so you can keep that seeding rate considerably lower. So I always just tell people, with 15-inch row planter, you're already um, at least a third of the rate, than you would if it was a full rate seeding out there. Um, so you can get down there probably in the 2 to 3 pounds, and that all depends on seed size too. Radish has a wide range of seed size. So I'm just whatever the seed size, you kind of got to do it like you were seeding wheat or seeding soybeans. You got to know how many seeds that you want, but you want to seed about every 2 inches, so whatever that seeding rate comes to, if you know your seed size, and so that's working really closely with your seed dealer, because there's a big difference in seed sizes.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we do have one more question. At what time do you move to spring interseeding of cover crops?
Say that again. I could probably read it too.
Sure, sorry about that. So yeah, it's in the chat, but at what time do you move to spring interseeding of cover crops?
Do you mean into wheat, I wonder? Interseeding in the spring cover crops, but now
No,
or
interseeding into corn.
well, it's more growth of the corn, and most people shoot for between V3 to V5, is generally, and even that goes back to what species are you going to plant, and if it's something like annual ryegrass or some of those that are shade tolerant, then it's in the growing corn. If it's something like fava beans, those can be planted right at the same time that you plant your corn. So it depends on your species, but more commonly than not, most people that are doing that on a regular basis are doing that right around V3 to V5, somewhere in there.
Great, thank you. It looks like we are out of time, so we'll go ahead and end this meeting. But thank you, Barry, so much for hopping on and sharing that presentation. It was great, and thank you all for being here for the presentation, for all the questions. So I guess with that being said, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.